So apparently a lot of WandaVision spoilers have leaked online, and let me just say, I can't believe they're going to kill off. Welcome to the Watcher. I am your cult leader, Tom. I just watched episode 5 of WandaVision, and let me address that right off the top that I just talked about in the bumper. The whole spoilers thing. Apparently, there's been some leaks online, plot spoilers, possibly some pictures, and even some toy leaks or something. Just to be clear, I haven't gone near any of that stuff. I don't intend to. Unless something gets spoiled for me, I'm not going to talk about in general. I'm going week to week, so if you want to do the same, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing here. I haven't even watched the most recent trailer because I'm just like, what's the point? Like, I'll see it soon enough. There's no point just looking at a trailer and having something potentially spoiled for me. So, regardless, we're going week to week. And this week, we went back to our sitcoms. We went to the 80s, which is weird because we have this whole 80s nostalgia thing going on at the moment. But it was nice to have like something that was a bit more direct, not just like, hey, remember the 80s? Remember arcades and crazy parachute pants? No, that was not a dig at Wonder Woman, but you know, I guess you could put a dig at Wonder Woman in there. But yeah, we got 80s sitcoms specifically this week, so it kind of worked a bit better when it was a bit more focused on 80s just the sitcoms, essentially. Well, although they did have a jazzercise joke, but we'll leave it off. So yeah, let's talk first about sitcoms that kind of felt like it was referencing. I was actually, I want to say this first before I say anything else. Last week I kind of said, surely you're going to have a kind of a mixed narrative. It doesn't make sense to kind of just go, hey, that's what's going on in the real world. By the way, now let's just watch a straight up sitcom. So yeah, they are starting to mix the narrative between Sword and the sitcoms. So I'll probably cover all the sitcom stuff first, then I'll cover the Sword stuff, and then maybe I'll talk a bit more about that ending. Ooh. Which is very interesting. So the sitcoms I felt they were mentioning, there's one very, very obvious one, which is Family Ties. The font is very much like Family Ties. The frame is very like Family Ties. You can actually see it behind me on the video version. Sorry, audio version. Colouring in the outline of the family, that is all directly from Family Ties. I thought there was a few kind of nods to the Wonder Years in there. Again, 80s sitcoms are not my forte. I was born post 80s, so there you go. The other one, and again, this could just be something like sometimes your brain just makes connections. There's one shot in the opening titles that looked really like a shot from the Full House opening titles. Is that me just making connections and it's not there? I don't know. Again, as I briefly alluded to in the video version last week, Elizabeth Olsen's sisters, the Olsen twins, were in Full House, so could have been a cheeky nod. So let's talk about the episode title first, because it kind of varies whether or not I have the episode title in front of me when I film, because it just generally speaking, they put out like episode 5 and then they update it with the title. Last week they didn't have the title updated when I recorded, and in my head I was like, you know what would be a really good title? We Interrupt This Program. Sure enough, that was the title of last week's episode. This week's episode is a very special episode, because one thing I'd like about the titles of WandaVision episodes is they kind of work on two levels. This one worked, of course, because this was a very special episode because of a very special ending made it there, but also the title kind of hinted to that sort of saccharine PSA quality that a lot of 80s sitcoms had. And that certainly had this. So we do get, again, the traditional kind of sitcom tropey kind of plot, which is the boys get a pet. Can we keep the pet? The boys get a dog. You know, kind of a classic one. I do want to show this kind of one photo, which I felt like was just such, they really captured the essence of a sitcom here, which you can see in the video version. It's just, you know, the mom with the hands on the hips kind of cranky, and then the kind of, I guess, the fun aunt character of Agnes kind of giving the kids what they want. So that's the kind of basic plot. There's a dog, the kids want to keep the dog, and they get to keep the dog. Now, the big question, though, is, well, I guess we should talk about the kids first. Last time we saw the kids, they were babies. At the start of this episode, they were babies. Within the first 2 minutes, they were like, I guess, kind of 5 or 6. And basically, they were told, you won't get a dog until you're 10. And then they age themselves up to 10, which, yeah, it seems like the kids are in control of their aging, which is interesting because there's another moment where Wanda specifically tells her, like, don't age yourself up or whatever. So, yeah, the kids are being aged up already. They're 10 at this moment. Who knows what they're going to be by the end of the show, but certainly it looks like they're aging themselves up to be young Avengers. So welcome to the team, Speed and Wiccan. I do also want to mention the clothes they're wearing. The colours were very reminiscent of their eventual costumes, the kind of brown and red and navy that Wiccan wears was very much kind of what his colours of his costume was. Speed's costume probably is more green and white, but I think in this episode he was wearing kind of more quicksilvery colours, which that could certainly be what we get in the MCU version anyway, as far as costume wise. But it's too early to say, but it certainly looks like these guys are going to be Young Avengers. First ballot Young Avengers, Speed and Wiccan. So yeah, the plot of the episode, aside from that, was pretty straightforward. We actually didn't get too much of the kind of sitcom world, in my opinion, this time. As much as a lot of the episode was set there, it's not like we got much forward momentum on the actual sitcom plot, but I don't think you necessarily need that now anyway, considering where we know that it's kind of a fabrication. But there is some things I want to talk about. The most notable of which is what the hell is going on with Vision in this sitcom world. He has a few moments where he kind of is like, this isn't right, this isn't reality, kind of thing. One of the things is actually something I kind of pointed out in one of the early episodes, is that Agnes kind of shows up when the plot demands her to, with whatever is needed. Like, remember in the first episode, it was like, the boss coming to dinner, and here's all the food, Wanda. Was that my Catherine Hahn impression? Apparently. When this one, it's like, oh, you have got a dog? Well, I got a kettle right here. So she's kind of seemingly playing along with Wanda's delusions, I guess. And in a moment where basically Vision kind of breaks from script, I suppose you could say, she kind of has to sort of improvise. And she's kind of like, oh, well, we take it from the top, or we start again. And she's saying this to Wanda as if Wanda is the director, right? Because she's seemingly aware to a certain degree that Wanda is in control of all this. She's not like the rest of the character. She's got a special place in this, and seemingly is feeding into the delusion and making the plot progress to a certain degree, which is pretty interesting. Also, as Vision points out, Wanda uses magic in front of Agnes without even hesitating. So that's kind of interesting. I got a feeling we might see that in an earlier episode. I can't remember. I know that apparently it said that on the board in the Sword episode we had last week, that she uses magic in front of her. So I'm pretty sure that was the case. But it is interesting here to see it called out. So yeah, this Agnes character is very, very interesting, and we still don't really know what her story is. But it's certainly an interesting one. Even all that said, when it comes to the magic side, I guess I'm going to just carry on there, but I'll come back to Vision in a sec. But yeah, obviously, eventually the dog, who is named Sparky, I should mention, reference to Tom King's run on Vision, which I don't know how that looks with a green screen, because there's a lot of green in Vision, of course. That's, I guess, just to prove to anyone who says they don't read comics, there you go. Rubber hose up your nose, kids. That's a dated insult. That wasn't even the 80s sitcoms. That might have been the 70s. But anyway, that Sparky is the name of the dog because he tried to lick a power outlet, which either a dumb dog or something else I might get to. But that's the name of the dog in Tom King's run on Vision, which is definitely very very influential on this run, even though that focused more on Vision having a family in the suburbs. But anyway, you can definitely see the influence it has on it. So the dog eventually kind of dies. He eats some bad leaves, as it were, from azalea bushes, and dies. And there's a moment where the kids are kind of pleading with Wanda, like, bring the dog back. But Agnes seems surprised at this, and whether she's just playing on, but she's like, you can do that? You can bring someone back to life? Now here's my Tom's theories. Wah, wah, wah. I nearly forgot him. We cannot go an episode of Tom's theories. So she kind of is surprised by that. And also Wanda doesn't bring him back. Now, to be honest, if you were going for that perfect sitcom reality of anything can happen and everything is positive, you would presumably bring the dog back. So the question is, did the only person that she seemingly brought back, and we don't know is this purely her, and that's leading into what I'm saying, was Vision. So she has brought one person back, and she seemingly couldn't bring back the dog. At least that's my assumption, because you would bring it back biologically if you could. So if this was a one-time resurrection, was it Wanda that did it at all? Is it just that she literally made a deal with the devil to bring back Vision, and she can't really revive people? Maybe I'm looking too far into it. Maybe, again, I'm just all aboard the Satan train, baby. Woo-woo! Woo-woo! So, yeah, I don't know, but that's just an interesting thing that kind of entered my head. Back in the sitcom world, which I guess we can now call the Hex as well, At least that's what the sword agents were calling it. Again, hexagon, hex like a witch cast on people, so it works on a couple of different levels. Vision is still questioning that reality. So as I mentioned, he did question how Agnes always shows up kind of when it's convenient. But he also mentioned goes to work, which also I should say there was kind of a point where it seemed like there was kind of an inconsistency in the world again. This time Agnes wasn't around to kind of right the ship there, where the kids were like, "Why is Dad at work? It's like it's Saturday," and she's like, "No, it's not. It's Friday or whatever." They were like, "Yesterday is whatever." So you know, but again, Wanda's able to kind of talk her way out of that situation. But he's talking with one of his colleagues. I think it was Norm was the guy's name. I can't remember. There was a guy with a mustache, and that wasn't him. I mean, it wasn't Herb either. So, and in a moment of kind of where he's kind of questioning things, he taps him on the temples, and seemingly this makes the character snap out of Wanda's kind of delusion. He's like, "My mom's sick. I gotta call my mom. Where's my phone?" He's really, really distressed, and then Vision puts him back under. And then after that, Vision comes home to Wanda and confronts her in a moment that was really tense. It looked like we were about to see Wanda and Scarlet Witch, or Vision and Scarlet Witch, I should say, fight. Which they also have a kind of a cute joke in Sword. They're like, "Does she not have an alias?" Which I'm assuming by the end of this, she could be called the Scarlet Witch, but we will see. So he really goes after Wanda. It's a really intense scene. We haven't seen Vision have this level of emotion in a while, or ever probably. He's never really been so like uncomposed and angry. And I also love that moment where Wanda's just like, "Hey, we're not doing this. Play the credits." So as this happens, he goes home and he says, "You're keeping people hostage." This guy was in pain, and he says, like, very interestingly, he's like, "Wanda, you can't control me the way you do other people." So again, Vision seemingly turning on Wanda a little bit. Is that going to play in somewhere down the line? We don't know. But also, what was very interesting about that is that Vision says he can't remember anything before Westview. He doesn't remember him being Avenger. Doesn't mean his creation. He only remembers what Wanda's showing him in the sitcom world. So that's kind of sad, actually. But because he really is like a kind of a victim now to a certain degree, that he has been brought back. And they also mentioned that, and we'll come back to this in a sec, but that basically in doing this, Wanda has violated what Vision wanted. Vision wished he was never used as a weapon, and it also violated the Sokovia Accords. So all that said, it looks like they're going to fight. And in fact, in the video right behind me, they're literally kind of squaring up to each other, getting ready to throw down. But Vision was somewhat sympathetic. He was kind of like, originally this might have been something you were doing subconsciously, but now you're very consciously doing this. You're keeping these people hostage against their will. I guess if you're keeping someone hostage, it's always against their will. Poor choice of words. But he says, like, "I want to know what's outside of Westview. Why is there no other kids in Westview?" These are all things that we're kind of like, why is that? Are we going to get an answer to that? I don't know. But Wanda says very interestingly, like, not everything is in my control. So it sounds like something else is at play here. It's not all Wanda doing this. And one thing that was outside of her control is the doorbell ringing. Dun, dun, dun. Who's at the door? We're going to come back to that in a minute, because we want to talk about what's going on with Sword throughout all this. So Monica is being inspected by Sword. When we last saw her, she was thrown out of the simulation. And things are also very tense, I will say, at Sword, seemingly between Jimmy Woo and Tyler Hayward, the director of Sword. I should mention, if I didn't, and some people might be confused, Jimmy is not a Sword agent or a SHIELD agent. He is an FBI agent. So things are very tense there. But it does seem like because of that tension, it sort of brought Monica, Jimmy Woo, and Darcy together as sort of a team within Sword where they're working together. And interestingly, it feels like that team is sort of a bit more sympathetic to Wanda, whereas generally SHIELD are not sympathetic to her at all. There's a big kind of meeting here, and Monica's like, Wanda kind of tried to save me. Like, if she wants to be dead, I'd be dead, basically. But they're like, first of all, she's keeping thousands of people hostage. Okay, they actually go out and call her a terrorist. And she's like, she can't be a terrorist. She doesn't have a political or ideological, goal. And then we find out something pretty damning. Something that is creepy and could very much be like, hey, maybe Wanda's a villain now, or will be. Seemingly, she broke into a Sword facility and stole Vision's corpse. to try revive him, which is like, whoa, okay. So we're going there. We're weekend at Bernie's, baby.
He may be dead, but he's the life of the party.
Now the question is this all exactly what we're seeing? We don't know. Again, this could be fake news? Maybe it's altered footage. Maybe Wanda's in the control zone. We don't know. But regardless, it does very much seem like she stole Vision's corpse. Now, on the other hand, I will say that it looked like Sword were kind of literally digging them apart and looking at the pieces and maybe trying to make their own Vision. I don't know. So that's not necessarily right as well. We don't necessarily know if Sword were like the good guy in all this. It's hard to believe that they would entirely have their hands clean. And yeah, that is where they mentioned that basically that was a violation of Vision's wishes and and the Sokovia Accords as well. So one of the big things that's interesting, I kind of mentioned this, I think a couple of weeks ago, which is that like, hey, Monica still has her clothes, so the clothes aren't a spell. So how did that work? So the way it worked is that basically, as we said, the stuff is kind of adapts to the kind of production design. So it was 70s clothes because the sitcom was set in the 70s. And it kind of gets rid of any inconsistency or something that doesn't make sense. So what they find out is like basically they're like, here is Monica's clothes, and after looking at the qualities of them, she shoots some bullets at them, and the bullets, don't do nothing. They bounce off it. She's like, the clothes are bulletproof. That's because these clothes are 70% Kevlar. I was wearing a bulletproof vest when I went in. It doesn't make sense that just a regular person would just be walking around wearing a bulletproof vest. So because of that, it adapted, and my clothes and my bulletproof vest kind of merged. So everything that doesn't fit in that era is being adapted. So she says, what if we put something that would work in that era? And that gives her the idea to put in a drone, but not a modern drone, an 80s one, because of course we're in the 80s. Now, we should also mention that in doing this, the drone isn't in the sitcom. Again, she does mention like, hey, like Wanda's kind of cropped the shot so you don't see, or framed the shot, I should say, so we don't see the drone. So again, seemingly Wanda's in control of what they're seeing in the sitcom world. But Monica, and again, this really shows the divide between Monica, Jimmy, and Darcy, and the rest of Sword. She sends in the drone just to try to communicate with her, but unbeknownst to her, Sword have weapons in the drone, and they fire upon her, which was not a good idea, because then we get probably one of the most villainous moments from Wanda yet, and a really intense, really cool scene. I love the way it looked as well visually. The shot behind me I just thought was fantastic. It was like straight out of a comic book panel. Wanda comes out of the hex. She walks right out of it, drone in hand, up to the Sword agents and throws the drone at her feet. And they're basically like, "What the hell are you doing, Wanda?" Like, and she says, "Like, don't come at my home again. Basically, don't mess with my family. This is your only warning." She has all these guns pointed at her. I don't know what those are going to do. But Monica's like, "Look, you got to believe me. I didn't know there was a weapon there. I was there with your babies. I'm an ally. You can trust me." And it looks like she's about to just magic the fuck and maybe throw her into the next, throw her out of New Jersey altogether. But at that moment, she kind of stands down to a certain degree. But she kind of sort of defends her actions as well. She's like, they're like, "You're keeping people hostage." And she's like, "I'm not the one with guns pointed at me." And then she walks away, but she uses her magic so that all the people with guns, all the soldiers, stop pointing them at her and point them at Director Hayward, and then disappears back in to the hex, which is very intense scene, very interesting. Again, really pushing the idea that Wanda could be a villain or going towards that direction. There was a resurfaced interview during the week where it looked like people were really digging into this, where Elizabeth Olsen was like, "I'd love to do House of M."
My favorite is House of M, but that would never happen. But
never say never in this.
I mean, if she could have two fake babies and everyone tell her that they don't really exist, and then her just go nuts, that would be unbelievable. But I don't think they're gonna do that. It might be a little too dark for the Marvel universe. When she loses her mind, it's my favorite thing in the comics.
I mean, chances are she doesn't even get full scripts to half the stuff she works on with Marvel anyway. I don't think they're like, "Hey, just so you know, someday there's going to be a Disney Plus, and someday when the Vision is, dead and you revived him, and we've done the whole Infinity Gauntlet thing, we're going to have a Wanda sitcom, which will be kind of like House of M. So I think people were digging into that anyway. But regardless, that is where we left Sword. So the only thing we have to come back to then is who's at the door, because this is something everyone is going to be talking about, and it raises so many questions, to be honest. And I think when we heard the doorbell ring and they built up this mystery, I think all of us were like, oh, it's Quicksilver. So the question was it Quicksilver? Now, in the MCU, that would mean Aaron Taylor Johnson. But jaws dropped when it turned out it was Evan Peters, the Quicksilver from the X-Men universe. Where do you start? I could do a whole video on this. Where the hell do you start with this? Right, so let's very quickly go into why there are two Quicksilvers, if you're not aware. So, before Disney owned Fox, of course, the rights to Marvel properties were kind of split up. But one of the properties that Fox had were, of course, the X-Men. Now, in the comics, Wanda and Quicksilver are both mutants. They're both the kids of Magneto. But it's actually very unique, relatively unique circumstances where both Fox and Marvel were allowed to use Quicksilver and Wanda. Now, they never really used Wanda in X-Men. She was like a little kid in the Fox series. But they did use Quicksilver. In fact, they used Quicksilver before he was in the Marvel series, because he was in... Well, actually, I suppose, aside from the post-credit scene, the first main appearance was in Days of Future Past, played by Evan Peters. Now, part of that deal was basically, hey, on the Fox side, you can use Quicksilver. You just obviously don't mention the Avengers. You're cool. They basically had no limitations. On the Marvel side, it was a bit more possibly litigious. They had to be very careful. They couldn't mention the father. In other words, they couldn't mention Magneto. Couldn't mention that they were mutants, which meant that they had to come up with this whole different way of how they got their powers, which is why they got their powers from the Mind Stone. So the thing is, of course, the MCU Quicksilver is dead. He died in his first appearance. Quicksilver throughout the X-Men films has been there quite a few times, and there was all sorts of rumors and speculation that Evan Peters could be in this Quicksilver, but the question was in what form, and we don't really have an answer here yet. Now, what I do find interesting is this is, of course, the X-Men actor who plays Quicksilver. Now, the way they presented it, Darcy says, like, they recast Pietro, so they could go a few different ways about this. It's hard. I don't think it's going to just be a cheeky nod to, like, hey, this guy played Quicksilver in the X-Men films, boom, now he's going to play a version of Quicksilver. But the question is he going to be our main Quicksilver going forward in the MCU? Possibly not. One thing we should mention as well, and this is a good... If you're ever not sure about something that you're being presented with, as far as what they're showing you, and they want you to draw your own conclusions, if you want a bit of extra kind of clues there, you should listen to the audio descriptive. Because I listened to the audio descriptive, which of course would be if someone was blind and they were just being told what was happening on screen for this scene. And the woman very specifically said, it was narrating, it said it was the Quicksilver, the one from the X-Men films. So, I mean, they definitely want to draw that comparison, obviously. So I don't know, does that mean this actually is the Quicksilver from the X-Men films? If it is, then this is our first introduction of the multiverse, which is interesting because obviously we're going to dive into that sooner rather than later, but we don't really know yet what it is. This is a very enticing tease because we don't know what this means for the world outside of a sitcom world. Did Wanda just basically tear the universe into making a multiverse happen? In which case, does that mean other X-Men characters could appear? I mean, baffling implications. What I do find interesting as well, and this could be kind of hinting towards the fact that Wanda has sort of messed with the aesthetics and his mind as well. The hair of Quicksilver in the X-Men movies was like a silver kind of bob. It was like, no question about it, really silvery hair. Whereas the MCU Quicksilver had kind of like sort of whitey blonde with black underneath. And his hair here is a lot more like the MCU version of Quicksilver as far as kind of having black underneath. So, you know, it feels like Wanda has sort of, again, retrofitted him to make more sense in the MCU. Actually, interesting enough, the audio script have also called that hair blonde, which I'm like, come on, lady, are you blind too? That's not blonde. But anyway, that is where we leave the ending. Very enticing. As I said, I could talk about that all day because it has so many implications, but who knows what it'll eventually lead to. Before we go, though, I do want to talk about some of the Easter eggs. Quite a few in this episode. Some of them we talked about, obviously references to the sitcoms and X-Men and Tom King's one. I also mentioned the colours. The only one that I still want to talk about is, of course, the welcome return by many, of the ads that interrupted. Now, we had talked about how basically all these ads were kind of Wanda's trauma and past and that kind of thing. We got one here where I was like, oh, okay, I think I know what that's about, but let me double check. And then once I looked up the name, it was really obvious. So, Lagos, brand paper towels. Lagos is the city in Nigeria, which Wanda basically kicked off civil war on the Sokovia Accords. Crossbones had a suicide vest on. Wanda tried to contain it and try to dispose of it, but she wasn't able to hold on to it, and because of that, there was an explosion that killed many innocent people, which is what kicked off Captain America's Civil War and brought in the Sokovia Accords. Basically, had a massive effect on the MCU going forward, and it was pretty obvious in general that with the mopping of the red fluid, it definitely looked like kind of blood and kind of like undoing the kind of violent acts of your past. It actually reminded me of that line in Avengers as well, when about blood in your ledger. But or red in your ledger, I should say. Blood would be a bit obvious.
I got red in my ledger. I'd like to wipe it out.
About how basically is this kind of Wanda saying like, look at all the blood and murder and death that I've brought to the world. Can't you undo it? Is that maybe that was that question? I don't know. Kind of undoing with paper towels. I don't know. But of course the line was, for when you make a mess, you didn't mean to. Lagos paper towels. So yeah, she didn't mean to make that mess. So at least that's good. But the question is she going to come smelling roses at the end of WandaVision? Which, boy, right now it doesn't look like she will, does it? Because it certainly seems like she's keeping a lot of people hostage. But she's not fully in control. Who is in control? As I said, I'm all aboard the Satan train. So yeah, that's where we're leaving it for this week. What did you think of this episode of WandaVision? In my opinion, this is the best episode so far. I'm really excited for how this show is shaping up. It feels like, it feels like that clip from Futurama. Like they keep giving us like a question, like who's behind all this?
That's a very good question.
And then it's like, oh, Quicksilver's at the door.
That just raises further questions.
Like, I'm really loving this show. There's also a rumor we might get an extra episode, that it might be 10 episodes. Who's to say at the moment? But regardless, if there is, you can guarantee I'll be watching it, and you can come back here and hear what we're talking about. If you did enjoy this, please give it a like, please subscribe, and come back next week, because remember, I'll be watching. Take care.